Today, we shift gears just slightly, talking about sacred words, how we reclaim, redefine, and rediscover them. And the reason for this is pointed out in Jonathan Merritt's book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch, where he suggests that people are talking less about God and less about faith than we once did, which is not meant to be an indictment of the world or society or pointing a finger at cultural changes. It's meant to be a mirror where we reflect upon ourselves, thinking, how many conversations do I have about God and faith? And how do we use the sacred words of the church? That he looks at Google's Ngram statistics, which are not definitive, but certainly suggestive, that it's a collection of books, newspapers, printed materials from the year 1500 to 2008. And he looks at how often certain sacred words are used over those years. And he notices how many of them have been in decline. Words like grace, mercy, wisdom, faith, sacrifice, honesty, righteousness, evil. He notices how compassion words like kindness have dropped over those years 56%. Or how gratitude words like thankfulness has declined 49%. And we can conjecture the reasons for this, looking at various surveys, asking people of faith and society in general how they feel about religion and religious conversation. That there are several reasons people note that they do not engage in using those kinds of words. It could be ignorance, where people say, I'm just not sure how to talk about those things. Or indifference. It just doesn't matter one way or the other to certain people. And then one that rang out loud and clear, avoidance. That all of those conversations have become politicized or mishandled or co-opted. They create tension or lead to arguments, and it's just better to avoid them. So it raises the question, how then do we use sacred words to communicate, to tell our story, to understand our faith and why it is meaningful to us? We can look within the church, and we know there's a certain vocabulary that we find inside the walls of a congregation. Words that we know what they mean, whether we use them or do not use them or just have heard them in the past. Words like quiet time, backslider, love offering. That we know what those words mean, but if we were to use them outside the walls of the church, some might look at us rather confused. It is much the same way as the papers I turn into my English teacher in high school, where I would get them back with red all over them. And in several places, the teacher would write, "Be more specific." And I would ask, "But don't you know what I mean?" And the teacher said, "It's not about what you mean, it's about what you say." How can we be clear about what the sacred words that we use mean in terms of our faith? Krista Tippett once said, A lot of words we need the most have been watered down by overuse and cliche in politics and culture, and this includes words that are very meaningful for many Christians. Love, peace, faith, and justice, to name a few. I don't think we can expect these words to necessarily convey what we mean when we say them. And so we must surround them with an ecosystem of vocabulary and both words and practices that carry the richness of our meanings when the words themselves need reviving. That we always, from generation to generation, need to reclaim, redefine, and rediscover what our sacred words mean. That we are to tell our story, to simply be genuine and authentic about who we are, not only to those inside the church, but to those that we meet and share life with wherever it takes us. And of course, there has been many things written about the rise of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, those who claim no religious affiliation, that we cannot assume that everyone knows what we mean when we use words like grace, justice, mercy, and love. It's like when a child is learning a new language and they read a word in a book that they do not know the meaning of, and they come and ask us something as simple as, what does the word soggy mean? And we might scratch our heads. That's not a word we've ever had to define. So, in that given moment, we have to break it down to its basic elements to convey the meaning of it to someone who is just trying to grasp how to define it. That we could first compare it to something. Well, soggy does not mean wet, but it also does not mean dry. It's somewhere in between. Or we could give an example of it. You know, when you walk outside after it has rained, the ground is a little soggy. Or we might even tell a story. Like when I got out of the pool, I dried off with my towel and I threw it on the ground and it just sat there for a while, and I went to pick it back up and it wasn't soaking wet like it had been in the pool, but it wasn't dry, it was just soggy. That we have to learn how to break down our sacred words into their basic elements, to reclaim them, redefine them, and rediscover them, which brings more meaning to our lives and better communication in our faith. Because ultimately, words shape worlds. That the words that we use and how we use them helps shape the world around us. Merritt gives the example of a linguist by the name of Lara Boroditsky, who was giving a lecture at Harvard, talking with students and faculty there, when she asked everyone in the auditorium to close their eyes and then point north. And hands just went in every direction imaginable. She did the same thing at Princeton and Stanford with the same result. No one really knew for certain the direction of north. But then she gave a lecture in a region of Australia where she asked the audience to close their eyes, and she asked everyone to point north. And everyone in unison pointed in the same direction. That apparently in that region of Australia, they were used to giving cardinal directions. You know, go northwest, put that south, place it west of where it is, move to the east, where in the Western Hemisphere, we use more spatial terms. Move to the left, go to the right, get in front of or stand behind where you are. That words shape worlds. So our sacred words are important to us, and as we communicate, just tell our story with authenticity and sincerity. I still remember sitting in Miss O'Tyson's class in kindergarten. We all had a square on the edge of the carpet. Mine was to the right of the chalkboard and to Miss O'Tyson's left, right next to Megan Shannon. And right above the chalkboard were pictures of every letter in the alphabet. And every week we learned a new letter. We would use it in different ways. We would talk about words that start with that letter. And on the pictures above the chalkboard, each letter was illustrated in a picture. So like the B was made out of baseball bats. They were all ways of breaking down words and letters to their most basic elements. That we need to take our sacred words, to reclaim them, redefine them, and rediscover them, to think about, what do I mean when I talk about God's grace? And how does that convey to me and to others the meaning of it in our faith? So that our sacred words are not just known to those inside the walls of the church, but we have a way to talk with sincerity about words like faithful, prayer, mystery, fall, grace, and many others. That each week we will take one word and think about how to reclaim it, how to redefine it, or how to rediscover it for our lives. Amen.